Hi, this is D. Ramirez. Now, for a long time, I found the concept of transient design confusing. But it was my friend and very, very talented producer, stroke mixer, James Herr, who really got me onto the subject. Inspired by that, I decided to create this quick video to give you a brief overview of transient design. Perfect if, like me, you've ever been unsure about how it works and how and when to use it. Let's dive in. Okay, here we are in Ableton. Let's take a listen to this loop that I've got here. Okay, you can hear the tempo's quite quick. We've gone 1-2-9. It's sort of, quite sort of jacking, I guess. Love this kind of stuff. Now, let's take a look at what we can do with this. We want to basically emphasize this as much as possible. We want to get some of these sounds to poke out. Currently, everything sort of sits very one-dimensionally in the sort of spectrum. It's all sort of there at one place. We want some sounds to poke through. Now, how can we achieve that? Let me show you some techniques. There are many. This is one. Now, I'm going to start here with the kick drum. Let me just solo this. Let's take a listen to it in the mix. For me, it's not really present enough. It's a little bit sort of sat behind. Let's poke it out. Okay, right. Now, I've got one of my very favorite Ableton plugins, which came along in Ableton 12, I believe. Yeah, it's called Raw, and it's a distortion. Now, how I've set it, let's have a look. I've actually set it into multi-band mode. And what we've got 3 bands, low, mid, and high. And if I now put this on, I'm just going to solo the track so you can hear it. If I put this on, in the track. Now listen to it in the track. You can hear that it sort of punches out through a little bit. How did we achieve that? Well, let's start again with a new raw, and I can show you the techniques that I like to use. I've actually got mine set so it defaults to a multi-band mode. Now, I just want to sort of start by saying that saturation is what's known as a non-linear process. Linear is basically, a constantly set. You set it, it stays at one setting like that. Whereas saturation is very much dependent on the level going into it, and it will react differently dependent on the level. Okay, so if you have a loud sound like that and a quiet sound like that kind of thing, the loud sound will activate the saturation and the distortion a lot more than the quiet sound. So that means it's a very dynamic process, non-linear. You don't just add it and it does the same thing all the way through. It's actually dependent on the level that goes in. And we can manipulate this to our advantage. Okay. Now, if I go over here, I can look at the modulation routing, and we've got what you call an envelope follower. If we look at the envelope, if I just set into solo, if we look at the envelope, you can see that every time the kick hits the envelope, actually it sort of triggers this envelope. And you can see the blue line is the envelope itself. What we want to do is bring the release down, and you'll see that as soon as the sound finishes, the release goes with it. Okay? And what we can do now with this is we can use this mid amount here to actually add, we can modulate the amount. Now, if I put this amount on full, let's take a listen to what it does. Way too much. What I want it to do is just react to the very transient of the sound. How can we do that? I'm going to open up this here. What I'm going to do now is go click that. That's the amount there. Envelope to this. That's the modulation. Set that to 100%. Okay, and then this, and you can see there that there's a sort of little blue area that pops out. Is how much it's modulating, right? Now, all I need to do is just set the amount. Awesome. With it off. Now, I don't want to do it to the low one because it will just really distort it. It'll really overblow it. So let me show you that as an example. We don't want to do that. That's not what we want. So I'll take that off. It's this one we want here. So look. the mid-range frequencies, especially because it starts. Now, if we look down here, let me just get rid of this one. We can see down here as well that the crossover frequency, it starts at 200 hertz, it goes up to 2 kilohertz. Which is probably quite a good default setting for that mid-range. And we can also do the same with the top end as well. So look, let's add a little bit of spit. If you add this fully, way too much. But if you modulate it with an envelope, we go shape of 3 amount envelope. Just adds a tiny little bit of spit. Barely inaudible, but enough to make it pop out, and it's not too much. We can play with the envelope amount there as well. If you go to envelope, we can play with the release. Now, let's take a look at the level, because we now need to change the level of this. Quite a bit of difference. So I'm going to bring this down to like about -5. Same with this as well. I want to get the level pretty much sitting the same way. Let's go back even further, maybe like -6 or -7. There we go. So that's a great way I've found. You know, we don't need to do the high. I think maybe it's just the mid-range. I found this is a great way to sort of affect the transients just in the mid-range. So it only works when the kick hits at its fullest level, and it just adds that little bit of saturation at that level there. You can try the different shaper amounts there, or shaper styles. Tube preamp. Great. Now, the kick as it was would work really well in the club, but now you'll be able to hear this kick on a small speaker because we've added a little bit of distortion, but not too much. Okay, great. On to the next sound. Let's work on the bass. The bass here, we could do the same thing. Let's take a listen to it in the mix. Let me just take this sound off now, just so we can hear the bass. It's great, but it seems like it's background. Okay, same thing. I'm going to put the Ableton Raw on here, and let's add this. And I've done exactly the same. But it's not getting any louder. You can see the level stays the same, but it pops out. Great technique, right? And then, of course, you can set the release. I prefer it just on that very transient, so it just helps to poke through the sound a little bit. Okay, great. Next, on to the next sound. I think as well these beats are all coming from this amazing drum machine here, the D16 Nepathon. Love that. Let's take a look at how we can bring these out as well. I find them a bit wispy. I want to sort of add some sort of mid-range grunt to that, and we've done exactly the same thing using the mid-range. And I've set this though a little bit higher this time, so it starts at 300 hertz and it goes up a bit higher. So let's take a listen. And what we've done here is I've sort of centered it around the snare frequency, so without. Just giving it some punch in that mid-range. Okay, great. Now, what if you don't have Ableton? Okay, well, you can do exactly the same thing with third-party plugins, all right? Let's take a look, and I'm going to do that with this tube lead here. On its own, it sounds like this. Very much in the background, I feel. The 3D space seems like it's sort of sat behind. Let's work here, and this time I'm using Saturn 2, one of my absolute favorite plugins. And what I've done is I've set 3 bands. Well, I've set 1 band. I've actually created a band there. These are not being affected. You see, if I click on this, there's no saturation. This one's got no saturation. But this one, look, it has. What we've got here is I've set, the modulation there, I've added a new envelope follower, exactly like the Ableton Raw example I've just been showing you. That envelope follower is then added to the drive there. We don't want that, we've already set it. I've dragged it to there, and I've got it to affect it 100%. Watch what happens now. You'll see that every time the sound plays, it adds the saturation to the transient of the sound using this envelope. Like this, look. And I've brought down the volume of it as well, just to make sure. Let's make sure over here. I'm going to make this plugin a bit smaller so we can kind of make it, so we can fit it into here like this. Okay, I'll put it there. And then and we're going to check the volume of the sound as well. With it on and with it off. Weirdly, it's actually quieter. That's another thing about using saturation as well. It can sort of take away those peak levels. It can bring those down, and then you can push it a bit further. So let's bring that up in level. And what that's doing, again, it's saturating the transients of the mid-range frequencies, which helps it pop out in the mix. So again, in the track, with it off, with it on. Actually a bit loud, that, so let's bring those down. Okay, great. Okay, so on the flip side, as I did mention before, we can actually use this in an opposite fashion. Now, if I bring this sound up, you'll hear. If I bring this into the mix, I can't have it too loud because those transients and that sound seem to clash. What do we do if I want to have that sound quite prominent, but I don't want the transients to sort of get in the way and start creating a transient mush? Well, let me use this. This is free by Kilohertz. It's the Transient Shaper. Go download it. It's one of the best ones, believe it or not, and it's free. Let me open it up. And what I've done here is I've brought the attack down. Rather than emphasizing the attack, I'm de-emphasizing the attack, which gives me this. If I play it in solo, we'll hear. So it's keeping all of the other sounds, all of the sustained sounds, but it's de-emphasizing the attack. And that in the mix then. So it enables me to have that sort of texture sound up front in the mix, well, loud in the mix without it getting in the way. And what it does is actually putting it into a space. It sort of pushes it back a little bit in the mix, so it's not clashing. So if you find that you've got some transients that are sort of getting in each other's way, there's a lot of sort of stuff going on, you can then choose which sounds you want to put back into the mix, which is what I've done here. And now you can see, just with a quick few sort of transients shaping techniques here, that I've been able to choose which sounds I want to pop out in the mix and which sounds I want to push back. All right, that's just a few techniques that I like to use for transient design, transient shaping. Now, please, as ever, leave me in the comments some of your favorite techniques and favorite plugins that you like to use. I'm going to do another video on this subject because it's deep and it can be terribly confusing. So let's keep this conversation going.